The 89-year-old shunned the spotlight, instead choosing to stay on his ranch in Utah.
I wish I were opening with a rumor we could laugh off. But tonight, somewhere high in the Utah mountains he poured his heart into, an era dimmed. Robert Redford, movie star, filmmaker, stubborn champion of artists, took his final bow at 89. You can feel the ache pulsing across studios, sound stages, and living rooms. Some tributes read like love letters. Meryl Streep's words, especially, carry the hush of a friend saying the thing everyone else can't quite find language for. And that's the version of this story I want to tell. Not a museum tour of trophies, but the human arc of a man who kept choosing growth over comfort. If you rewind far enough, you meet a kid from Santa Monica born August 18, 1936, who ran fast, played ball hard, and made more than his share of impulsive choices. He swiped hubcaps. He accepted a baseball scholarship at the University of Colorado. It's not glamorous, but it is honest. Hidden in the chaos was a hand that could draw. He chased that hand to Europe, hitchhiking and sleeping in hostels, trying to be a painter. He wanted to see if life would answer back. It did, just not how he expected. He decided the work wasn't original enough. So he came home, shifted lanes, and walked into the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. That decision blew the doors open. By 1960, he was already on Broadway. And then came the spark. Barefoot in the Park. The movies followed first at the edges, then squarely in the center. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid made him a folk hero with a sly smile. The Way We Were and The Sting cemented that he wasn't just handsome. He was bankable and precise, the kind of presence that makes a scene feel inevitable. It would have been easy to camp there, to play the same greatest hits until the curtain fell. He didn't. He turned the camera around and startled everyone with ordinary people, and the first Oscar he took home wasn't for being adored on screen, it was for directing. That's a tell. It says he was never interested in being a statue. He wanted to shape the clay. He bought land in Utah, cared for it, built the Sundance Resort, and then turned a hunch into a movement. In 1980, he founded the Sundance Institute because he believed in that slippery, stubborn word, independence. He saw stories shoved to the margins and thought, I have a doorway. What if I hold it open? Pretty soon, the festival wasn't a scrappy side project. It was the launch pad for voices that changed the temperature of modern cinema. You know the names. He didn't take credit. He gave space. And that's rarer than it should be. Behind the scenes, he kept directing like someone with something to say, the Milagro Beanfield War. Then a quiet stunner with Brad Pitt wading through memory and a river runs through it. Then Quiz Show, a surgical portrait of compromise that earned him another Best Director nomination. The pattern was always the same. Resist the obvious. Chase the true. You don't get a life like that without carrying weight. Redford carried plenty. As a boy, he beat back a mild case of polio. He lost twin sisters shortly after they were born, and the family did what families of that time often did. They didn't speak of it. They endured. Later, he married Lola Van Wagenen in 1958. Their first son, Scott, died of SIDS months after his birth. He was 21, broke, taking acting classes, and suddenly older than his years. He and Lola kept going. 3 more children arrived, Shauna, James, Jamie, and Amy. And life, being life, kept throwing its curveballs. Shauna's boyfriend, Sid Wells, was killed in 1983 while Redford was filming The Natural. He stopped production to go to the funeral. Jamie was diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis and endured 2 liver transplants in 1993. Years later, he died of bile duct cancer in 2020. A parent is not designed to outlive a child. He didn't parade his grief. He protected his privacy so he could keep something sacred. But if you ever wondered how he said so much with so few words on screen, there's your answer. He'd learned to hold oceans quietly. He never stopped evolving. He reunited with Jane Fonda in Our Souls at Night in 2017, a film that feels like 2 old friends sharing a porch and telling the weather the truth. The next year, he announced The Old Man and the Gun would be his last acting role, then immediately undercut the finality with a shrug. Retirement is a strange word when there's life to live. That's what I keep hearing from those who knew him. He wasn't obsessed with endings. He was allergic to stagnation. Even Sundance, the institution everyone associated with a particular place, was allowed to change. By 2025, the festival's stewards decided they'd outgrown Park City and approved a move to Boulder, Colorado. Redford's message about it was all forward motion. Change isn't a betrayal, it's survival. At 89, even as his story was narrowing, he was still talking about growth. That's how you recognize a North Star. It points in the same direction whether anyone's looking or not. And then came September 16, 2025. The news spread with that surreal speed the internet gives to heartbreak. He died at home at Sundance, surrounded by people who loved him. Suddenly, the film clips felt like postcards from someone we weren't ready to lose. The tributes arrived fast and precise. Barbra Streisand called him charismatic, intelligent, intense, never boring, always exacting. Jane Fonda wrote like someone saying goodbye to a partner in crime, a beautiful person in every way, and yes, she cried. James Gunn posted about growing up on Redford's movies, about the grace in those performances that made movie star sound like a quieter, nobler job than the words imply. Antonio Banderas added that icon wasn't a cliché here. It was a description of the impact of how talent keeps moving through us long after the lights come up. Politicians weighed in, too. Say what you will about Hollywood's bubble. Some presences pierce it. He was one of them. What do you do with a life like that? You follow it back to the smaller rooms, to the art classroom where a kid realizes drawing can change his day, to a Broadway stage where the floorboards shake with first-night nerves, to a Utah hillside where the air tastes like snow, and a filmmaker sketches a place where unheard voices might finally be heard. You revisit his missteps because they're part of the instruction manual. You hold up the work because it's the residue of how he loved the world. I keep thinking about the word independence again, but not as an industry slogan. Independence as a way of being. To make choices that don't flatter you today because they build something valuable tomorrow. To leave the door open behind you. To be good-looking and still insist that substance is the point. To bear the weight life puts in your hands with some measure of grace, not because you're unbreakable, but because you refuse to let the breaks define you. Meryl Streep's tribute. Simple, direct, the kind only a peer can write, landed like a hand on the shoulder of an entire community. The message underneath all the messages was this. He didn't just decorate our memories, he organized them. He gave our imaginations a place to meet, and in that meeting we learned to expect a little more from movies and from ourselves. So here's what I'd ask you to do. Now that the headlines have settled into the timeline, take a moment with one Redford story you love. Watch the pause before the line. Notice the choices behind the camera, the restraint, the curiosity, the empathy for people in tight corners. Think about the festival that launched filmmakers who didn't fit the mold until the mold changed shape around them. Consider the family man who disappeared when the credits rolled, not out of aloofness, but to keep something human intact. Then share the piece that moved you. Pass it forward. That's how legacies work. They're not monuments. They're bridges. He once said there's a life to lead, so live as much of it as you can, as long as you can. He did. And because he did, generations of artists got to start where he left off. If that's not a beautiful ending, it's at least a worthy continuation of ours. Let me take you to the quiet part of the mountain first, the place where the wind forgets to be loud, where a porch light glows and family voices blur into one warm color. That's where the news landed. Robert Redford, 89, gone. Not as a headline, but as an absence you can feel in your ribs. The internet did what it always does. Flashed, echoed, moved on, but the people who knew him, worked with him, or simply grew up on those long, steady close-ups. They didn't rush. They measured their words. President Donald Trump, speaking to reporters before heading to the UK, kept it simple. Redford had stretches of years where nobody was better. In a moment where just about everything feels divided, that line stood up on its own legs. Utah's Governor Spencer Cox spoke like a neighbor. Redford came to those mountains, fell in love with them, built stories and protection around them, and shared all of it with the world. That track. If you ever drove into Sundance in winter, you could see the devotion built into the place. No neon, no noise. Everything designed to let stories be the loudest thing. But it was Meryl Streep's note that hit with the weight of a friend who doesn't need commas to be profound. One of the lions has passed. Rest in peace, my lovely friend. She said beautiful things about him for decades, but this one felt like a hand closing a book we all still wanted to read. If Meryl calls you a lion, she's not talking about posture. She's talking about how you move in the world. People keep listing the obvious golden hair, impossible jawline, the way a smile could tilt a scene. Sure, but that's not what these tributes are circling. They're aiming at the wake he left behind, the careers he nudged forward, the scripts he took risks on, the directors backed when everyone else shrugged and said, maybe next year. That's stardom with a job description. Think about the way he chose his people. Sidney Pollack, the son of immigrants who never confused sentiment with honesty, directed Redford 7 times. That's not just comfort, it's a shared thesis. Tell the truth, don't flinch. Out of Africa sits at the center of that partnership, a film that's somehow grand and intimate in the same breath. Redford brought the power of restraint to how a pause can be louder than a monologue. Streep brought that luminous interiority to how a look can hold the whole backstory. Together they didn't act like a romance. They made one. There's that river scene, the quiet ritual of washing her hair, words drifting from Coleridge, the camera refusing to hurry. Streep once laughed about pulling Roy Helland, her longtime hair and makeup wizard, into service to coach Redford through the shampooing. Then, by taking 5, she said she was so in love, not because it was flashy, but because he'd found the right tenderness. That's what their chemistry was. A hush you lean into. The public grief is loud right now, but the arrangements won't be. Redford left instructions. Keep the funeral small, family only, no red carpet, no cameras, no circus. His representative confirmed it as quiet. His wife, Sybil. Daughters, Shauna and Amy. 7 grandchildren, they'll gather in those mountains and do what families do. Remember the real person, not the silhouette. Later, if there's a memorial, of course it'll fill to the rafters with stories from actors he moved, directors he discovered, causes he lifted out of the footnotes. People will want to stand up and say thank you. They should. But the first goodbye belongs to the people who knew the shape of his laugh when no one was recording. Industry voices are writing their own postcards. Barbra Streisand talked about the intelligence and intensity that hummed under the beauty. Jane Fonda's grief was unvarnished. She cried, she said so, she called him beautiful in every way and meant America in there too. James Gunn remembered growing up through Redford's films, the quiet grace of them. Antonio Banderas called him an icon and somehow made icon feel like a precise measurement, not a cliché. Designers, directors, actors, governors, if you worked with images for a living, Redford walked through your house at some point. Here's the part of his story that always gets me. He could have coasted. He could have played the same sunlit rebel until the film stock ran out. Instead, he turned and built a platform for other voices at Sundance. In 1980, after directing Ordinary People and feeling the pull of responsibility, he decided independence wasn't just a personality trait. It was an ecosystem. He created a place where a filmmaker could show up with a small story and a big point of view and not be told to make it louder or shinier. He gave them a first room. Eventually, the festival grew so much it even outgrew its postcard setting. When organizers approved a move to Boulder, Colorado in 2025, his response wasn't nostalgic. It was the same thesis he'd been living. Change is how we keep what matters. That independence runs right through his later choices. He didn't chase comfort. He courted questions. All is lost is almost wordless. A man pitted against the sea and himself. Lions for Lambs and The Conspirator poked places where we prefer not to look. Even when awards didn't catch up, the work kept its voltage. He liked the long game stories that sit with you later in a quiet kitchen. And then there's the piece that never made it into the press kits, the private map of loss he had to navigate. Childhood illness, the deaths of infant twin sisters, the unimaginable grief of losing his first son, Scott, to SIDS. The shock of Shauna's boyfriend's murder during The Natural. Jamie's illness, the transplants, the recovery, then his death in 2020. That's not a resume. That's a series of rooms you have to find your way out of. He guarded his privacy not because he was aloof, but because he needed a place to put that weight down. If you ever wondered how he could say so much with so little on screen, there's your answer. He understood silence. The obituaries are going to keep listing the hits Downhill Racer, Jeremiah Johnson, The Candidate, the way we were. The Great Gatsby, 3 Days of the Condor, The Electric Horseman, Brubaker. They'll talk about the look, the range, or the deliberate refusal to chase range for its own sake. The directing Oscars, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the environmental fights he didn't just lend his name to, but actually showed up for. They'll quote the BBC on those all-American looks, the New York Times on his appetite for serious themes, Variety on the godfather of indie film, The Guardian and the Los Angeles Times on the magnitude of his era. They'll be right. But none of that explains why people are sending each other clips tonight like little lanterns. What explains it is smaller. It's the way he treated success as a tool, not a mirror. It's loyalty disguised as good taste. Choosing Pollack again and again because shared values make better art. It's the way he watched for the kid at the back of the room, with a voice no one had heard yet, and said, "Try it up here." It's Meryl calling him a lion and meaning courage, not volume. So here's where I leave you, and I want you to do something with it. Think about the first Redford moment that mattered to you. Maybe it's that half smile in the sting right before the con lands. Maybe it's the stubborn decency of all the president's men. Maybe it's the river in Montana catching light like a secret. Tell someone that story. Drop it in the comments, name the scene, the line, the beat that made you feel seen. If someone you care about loved his films, pass this along to them and ask for theirs. That's how legacy actually works. Not as a statue, but as a conversation that refuses to end. He said there's a life to lead, so live as much of it as you can. As long as you can. He did. Now it's on us to keep the door he opened propped wide for the next person coming up the hill with a story no one's heard yet.